Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk about the upset of the weekend. And it was an upset. Andrzej Fonfara defending his WBC international title against Joe Smith Jr., a fighter who had been knocked out before, a fighter who had not fought far away from home. He's from Long Island, right? This is the first time Joe Smith Jr. had traveled to another state to fight a fight of this magnitude, right? Now, incredibly, and I've put the footage in my favorites folder here, incredibly, Joe Smith Jr., after being muscled over to the side of the ropes by Andrzej Fonfara on his front foot, right? Joe Smith Jr., who starts the fight with his feet wide apart and then has his feet close together, gets off the punch of the weekend. It's a short right hand that hits Fonfara on the temple, and Fonfara is immediately down on the canvas. Fonfara then, in front of his crowd, right? Fonfara has relocated to Chicago. He's one of the princes of that city. Fonfara tries to get up, right? Because it's a testosterone thing. If you're going to knock me down in front of my family, I'm going to try to get up to let people know, all right, I got dazed momentarily. Let's not take the dazing too seriously. The problem is, as Fonfara gets up, his body's not ready to get up. He literally runs into the ropes. He's clearly not just dazed. He's dazed and confused. Right? Fight continues. And you're going to notice the difference between big-time punchers, guys who know that they're throwing 95-mile-an-hour fastballs, and everyone else. Joe Smith goes over there. This is the biggest moment of his career. He is this close. He's this close from becoming the WBC international champion. And folks, he's not in a rush. He's picking his spots. He knows he hits hard. He knows he throws 95 miles an hour. And let me tell you, he hits Fonfara with another right hand over by the corner. Fonfara is lucky the ring was as big as it was, because he might have been knocked out of the ring. You'll notice his head is well under the bottom rope, right? The referee, in my opinion, saved Fonfara's career by ending the fight at that moment. I'm guessing there's no one in Fonfara's corner who cares about him, who wanted that fight to continue, right? Joe Smith hits that hard. We can call this an upset. We can call this whatever we want. But people need to understand that Joe Smith has A-plus punching power. That right hand is that devastating. He lands it flush twice in this fight, and both times Fonfara hits the canvas. Now let me back up a little bit. I know I have a lot of young guys watching my video here. What I want the wannabe fighters, right, the people aspiring to get in the ring, to consider, because you've heard me here say many times that there's no money in boxing. What I want them to consider is the fact that Joe Smith, who is now, deservedly so, the WBC international champion, has a day job. In other words, this contender, who is more fortunate than most, right? He actually gets a shot at a title. Granted, it's not a world title, but it's close, right? He gets a shot at a title, which already puts him ahead of, 95+% of the fighters out there. He gets a shot at a world title. In other words, this guy is toward the front of the line. He's a contender. And even this contender needs a day job to pay the bills. Right? That's the first thing. Right? The second thing that leaps out about what happened this weekend is just how deluded Andrzej's Fonfara is. The film isn't that long. What I want people to do is to look at Fonfara's left hand. Right? Just look at his left hand. As you watch the footage, it's less than a round long. Just look at his left hand in, let's say, the 10 seconds before the knockdown. You're going to find that he's daring Joe Smith. He's literally daring Joe Smith to throw the right hand to the side of his head. Because Fonfara doesn't have a hand up, folks. It's down here. Right? Looks like he's trying to throw a left hook to the body or something. He's backing up Joe Smith. I guess the idea was that because Smith was on his front foot against Will Rosinski, right? And by the way, that fight went the distance. That's a big feather in Joe Smith's hat. We know more about Joe Smith's stamina than we do, let's say, in a different division, Anthony Joshua, right? Joe Smith has fought 10 rounds against a fighter who was supposed to beat him. And Smith, who has prodigious punching power, won the decision. In other words, there's more to Smith than one punch. I get the feeling because Fonfara saw Smith crowding Rosinski in that fight, he thought that if he could get Smith on his back foot, that would take away Smith's punching power. Right? Wrong move. He gets Smith on his back foot. You'll actually notice Smith, big puncher, is backing up. Right? Guess what? Joe Smith still has power. His balance is such that when he gets off the punch that, in my opinion, right, pretty much ends the fight. It's that first knockdown. His feet are wide apart. He still has leverage. He doesn't have to be coming forward on his front foot to generate power. I'm telling you, there are many power punchers in the sport of boxing who we don't know that about. We now know that about Joe Smith. Right? Here's a guy who's a home run hitter. Right? Who doesn't have to aggressively swing for the fences. So, after Fonfara gets him on his back foot and then risks the entire fight by not having his left hand up. Think about it. He's facing a righty with a big right hand. And this guy right in front of him for several seconds doesn't have a hand up, right, to block a right hand. And let's just say Fonfara is doing absolutely nothing to hide his body. In other words, he doesn't have a hand up and he's not moving. His upper body's not on a swivel. He's not trying to change the angle, so Smith has to think about throwing that right hand and say, oh, am I going to... No. Fonfara's in front of him, doesn't have the hand up, right? Is worse yet, try to throw some punches, right? Showing no defense. You're going to notice Smith doesn't have to fit that first knockdown punch into a tight window. It's not like Fonfara's like this and Smith lands the perfect shot. No. Fonfara is like this, standing upright. right? Look at the gap between where Smith's punch lands, right? It's on the side of Fonfara's head and where Fonfara's hand is, right? Let's just say Fonfara, and keep in mind I like Fonfara. I picked Fonfara over Chavez Jr., right? But let's just say when I talk about fighters being defensively blessed, Andrzej Fonfara is today not on that list, right? Defensive fighters can feel what you might throw before you throw it. They're at least aware of the fact that, hey, this guy's a big right hand, let me roll away from it, right? Occasionally they'll get caught, but the other guy has to work to land the shot, right? Sometimes you'll notice a guy has a hand up, but he doesn't block the shot because the other guy's able to get it through, the hand. Well, let me say this. Andrzej Fonfara is not close to being aware of Joe Smith Jr.'s right hand, nor is he close to blocking it, right? He shows no awareness of it. Maybe he thought, and this is fair, being a experienced fighter, maybe he thought that Smith's feet were too close together for Smith, who's backed up against the ropes, to actually get leverage on the punch. But wow, Andres, it's the first round. Your opponent's not tired. His tank is full, right? You're risking a hell of a lot against a guy with a 70% KO ratio in thinking, you know what? This guy's feet are too close together. I have him on his back foot. Let me just drop my hand. Let me ignore his right hand here, right? To me, that's too much of a risk, right? I understand it if it's the 10th round and dude is breathing out of his mouth and looks tired and you've gauged his power and you've been hit with some right hands and you know what you're doing. But here, Fonfara had never tasted the guy's power. He knows the guy has a 70% KO ratio. And he's going to drop his left hand. He's going to have no defensive construct. It cost him his title, right? Well-deserved win. Let's all keep an eye on Joe Smith. As I said, the interesting thing in this guy's background is that he beats Will Rosinski. Rosinski's other two losses, Edwin Rodriguez, world-class fighter, guy who fought Andre Ward, and former middleweight champion Kelly Pavlik. Rosinski's not in the habit of losing, right? He lost to Joe Smith Jr. by unanimous decision. Understand, I know there's not a lot of film on Joe Smith Jr. I know this film on Fonfara, you're going to say, oh, he's a puncher. That's how he, pays the bills with his second income, right? After paying bills with his, 9-to-5 job. But just understand, the puncher has beaten a defensive boxer. Maybe there's more here than meets the eye. Let me say this too. I was looking at the bodies of the two men. I have absolutely no idea. These boxers, how some of these guys, muscle bound, guys are muscular and somehow they're making 175 pounds. Joe Smith looks big to me. He's 6 feet tall. I know Fonfara is taller, but he looks big to me for the weight class, right? He looks like he's an athlete. He's in his mid-20s. Right? He's already gone 10 rounds. I'll say this. I don't know a lot about the guy. But what I do know is that there's a boxing renaissance right now on Long Island. Right? They now have a premier boxing venue, the Barclays Center. Right? Boxing's been rejuvenated in West New York City and the surrounding areas. Right? This guy has fought some guys. right? And of course, the Andrzej Fonfara fight, he went to Fonfara's backyard and brought his punch with him, right? Maybe this guy's a lot better than advertised. Let's keep an eye on this situation. In any event, he is a WBC international champion. Let me say this, well done, right? Because understand, after Fonfara gets off the canvas, right, if Fonfara survives the round, then maybe the window of opportunity closes significantly, right? Credit to Joe Smith on how he handles the moment. He doesn't run over, he's not wild, he's not, crazy. He's surgical, folks. Right? This is a guy who has so much confidence in his right hand that he knew if he could just pick his spot to land that next right hand, he was going to end the fight, and that's exactly what the guy did. Right? 10 out of 10. I congratulate the new champ. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com, and I'll concede too that Joe Smith Jr. himself is not defensively blessed, right? As Fonfara comes in, you're going to notice that Smith doesn't look completely comfortable raising his hands and stuff. But let's just say his hands are up a hell of a lot more than Fonfara's. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by.